Hello everyone, we are here for the 90th chapter of Your Hero Academia.
Oof.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. I knew this was going to be a long story going into it, but I don't think I ever actually thought about the fact, at least early on, that this would stretch to be well over 100 chapters.
Yeah. It's wild.
This is definitely the longest project I've ever worked on.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and start with some reviews. Atomical. Something tells me John's going to be just a tad more important than I thought.
Possibly.
It's Joan Arc, as in Joan of Arc. Ugh.
Hey, that wasn't mine. I didn't come up with the character name, but yes, it's basically a gender bent Joan of Arc.
Yes, could I speak up against the counselor and stuff? I think I'm barely hanging on to what's going on at this point, but this is very cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're interested enough to still be around.
All right, Joe Clone, you made an Akurui chapter. Awesome!
Yeah.
First, I love the intro with Kudai. Just shows how much more he's completely done with everything than having to spend his birthday all alone. Is just sad.
Yeah, he's like I've said it before, at this point, he's just 120% done with everything.
If Akurui hadn't already won your audience over, better be head over heels for him now. The rivalry with Hatsume was genius, and then the confusion over to how to approach the situation felt really him.
Yeah, it's how do I put that? Superior intelligence does not mean superior maturity. It's that's been something really difficult to balance, because he's undeniably a genius, but that doesn't mean that he necessarily understands social interactional skills in their entirety. For the most part, he's pretty well adjusted, I would say. But every once in a while, there's just things where he's just I don't understand how this works. And he hates admitting that he doesn't understand how something works.
Those tears, though, are the realization of the potential consequences of his genius. Really gave weight to his character development going forward. I wonder how he will confront himself now. Yeah,
that was... How do I put, that was something that I felt his character really needed at this point, and I finally felt was appropriate, was, on a surface level, you look at all the stuff that he's done, and it's been good, but he hasn't really stopped to think about the consequences that arose from them. Because he's just I can do this, it will make these things better, therefore it's right that I do it, and now he's confronted with this scenario, maybe I didn't do the right thing.
It's that whole classic overpowered character trope. It's it's not whether he can do it, it's whether he should, right? Yeah. It's the whole Superman argument.
But I think it's interesting on this level because physically he can't impose his will over things, but intellectual,
yes.
I like you said, it's the classic Superman trope, but with Superman it's a matter of he can force people to do what he wants. With this, he definitely make arguments. He can certainly try to maneuver things that way, but he can't physically enable it. And he kind of touched on that when he was no, you shouldn't give me one for all, because if you do, I would be able to impose all these things, and who's going to be able to stop me?
Yep. Introductions of Taiyang and Crow were perfect. Not sure why you spelled his name with a C when Wiki has it spelled as a Q.
I think honestly I was just lazy.
The meeting in the facility about the security buff went as well as I expected. But then Akurui mentioned the mole, and holy crap, we are in trouble. Hope the next chapter with Team Juniper will be just as awesome coming from future Aries' point of view. See you there.
Yeah, we are going to get a look at we're going to get a look at Team Juniper this in this next coming chapter. So let's see. So this next one is a novella by Silver.
Oh my goodness! All right,
He's catching up on a few.
Sweet. Well, I'm actually rested, so I'm going to attempt to do this without stumbling. All right. Silver 4700. So, because this is going to cover 5 chapters that I've missed, I'll be dividing this review into sections for ease of reading. Thank you.
He's gonna He's gonna brutally roast each chapter individually. That's what's about to happen here.
But I appreciate the organization as a dyslexic individual. All right, chapter 86. This was interesting. A good middle chapter. Mostly filler, but that's not inherently a bad thing. The stuff with Blake was kind of compelling, especially with how Kudai relates to her issues, so to speak. It was something I wasn't really expecting.
All right, score.
Same thing goes for her affection for Kudai. it kind of came out of nowhere for me, but then maybe I just haven't been paying attention.
It's like, it's not there if you squint at it. Because like sometimes people will bring this stuff out of left field and it's just like, oh, there were hints there all along. Like, if you're paying attention enough, you will be able to see what was happening a while ago. It's not something that you have to like peer really closely at. You just maybe with the other thing is maybe with this context, it makes it a little more clear.
And the other thing is she's kind of an introvert, so she's not going to be talking about her feelings to other people.
We don't see her point of view a whole lot either.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when she was there, like especially when she was interacting with Kodai, like the signs were. I definitely put signs in there.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's not something you should have to squint super hard at to see.
Yeah, not everybody's like the typical anime girl who gets all blushy and awkward when she has a crush, you know?
No.
Blake's not like that. All right. Not to mention that I'm not very good at love at all. Oh. So maybe I was just missing the signs.
Oh, no.
Bro, we have this idea in our culture that you should just be able to automatically read people's minds, and
that's not a thing, dude.
It's not, and when women don't communicate their feelings, you shouldn't have to read our minds. Sorry. It took me a while to figure that out as a wife, but I'm there. All right, sorry, tangent. Granted, it's been forever since I've read any earlier chapters, so that's probably another reason.
Yeah, that's fair. Like how do I put this? Like, I wanted it to be a factor in their character dynamics going forward, but I didn't want it to be this constant recurring thing because, like I've said, I hate love triangles.
Yeah, it's annoying.
It's really annoying. Like, I think it can be well done, and I'm trying to do it well, but I don't think it can be well done when, like, all people involved are being super obnoxious about it.
Also, it's like, in real life, like human interactions with friends, this kind of thing happens all the time. And generally, like if it's a friend group, the person with the unrequited love just kind of has to let it go, and they can't. It takes a while to let it go, but they're not going to sit there and be obnoxious and fight with their friends over the person, because that's really dumb, and that type of friendship doesn't last. So that's why, you know, the typical Hollywood love triangle is just super unrealistic, right? And so it's, you know. Anyway, I think it just makes more sense, because generally when you're having to work with people and that's not going to change in the foreseeable future, you just got to deal and keep moving forward, you know? Yeah. All right. So chapter 87, with how many quirks there are in this world, I'm genuinely surprised that no one has had any kind of desire to become a genuine Santa Claus. That's a good point, sir. Pretty sure I made a joke in Discord about that once, and how AFO fears him more than All Might. All for one, he fears him more than All Might. All right, got it.
I have a vague recollection of this. I'm sorry if I don't remember the whole thing.
That's funny. Sorry. I said I was rested. I really am. It's just really warm in here. I also liked their visit to their mom in prison. Penitentiary. It was a good section, but again, felt mostly like filler.
I can see why you're saying filler. Like, how do I put this? Like, I think some filler is good in the sense that, like, if you're defining filler as the stuff between like the action or like the main points of the story, I think some filler is fine as long as it continues to further the development of the characters, and it's not just, hey, we're doing this thing just to do this thing and see what would happen.
There's context for the emotional background and why people are doing what they're doing.
Yes.
Not a whole lot to say on this chapter. The Christmas aesthetic and fluff was that, and it was fun, and I was admittedly hoping for more ghostly things to happen in my own character's name, and SAO doesn't give it away. I have something of a fondness / fascination with ghosts and stories.
Phantom is the name of his player handle on the SAO stories.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, when I think I've done a couple of commissions for him. And usually the most difficult part is he has this insignia on his belt of like a will-o'-the-wisp type of thing.
Ooh.
And like I have to get him real close to like get the good details in there. Like when you zoom out, you don't notice it as much. But I like having those things in there just in case you can pay attention to it.
Very cool. Yeah. Granted, I read this before I found out all the things with the mental issues, but A part of me was wondering if you were leaning into the spirits are unable to manifest on Christmas Eve legend.
I mean, there hasn't really been a premise for ghosts being a thing in this story.
Aside from
like hallucinations.
And One for All.
And One for All, yeah. But that's like
that's
a
more
little different.
That's more of an echo.
That's an echo of the person who they were.
Mm-hmm.
But,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, chapter 88. I really like the conflict between All Might and Aizawa. It's never really brought up in the anime or OG story, aside from a few moments in the Dark Hero comic or Dark Hero arc. But All Might is kind of the worst person to have as a mentor in terms of expectations. Honestly, it's something.
He's trying.
It's something akin to everyone placing their faith in the Avatar. It just isn't that great.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that is. Like, to me, there's no question that All Might was a great hero. He's a questionable teacher.
Yeah, there's lots of great people who just aren't necessarily cut out for teaching because they're just naturally brilliant and they can't break it down in teachable chunks, really. Kudai seeing his old self is interesting, to say the least. Granted, I'm doing something similar in my never to be finished SAO story, but I have set an idea for that already. What you appear to be doing with his old self is interesting, and I'm wondering how you'll use it in the future. It's not a vestige, at least it doesn't really have the qualities of a vestige. I could be horribly wrong, though.
I mean, Joe Clone thinks that is his old vestige. So I can definitely see that there's arguments to be made for either side.
Lots more of Ruby. Don't know how I think of this. As writing this review, I genuinely love how you're handling Crow.
Crow's so much fun to write.
Don't know what to think of Tai, and I never truly liked Juniper in the OG, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, I can't change your mind about somebody about the canon material because that's not really my place to do. But I can hope that you'll have a better appreciation for the characters as I use them in this story.
Chapter 89. For these 2 points, I'm going to give you what I have written in my notes verbatim.
Uh-oh.
Akurui is turning into a loser nerd version of Tony Stark.
Hey!
Kudai is even more of a loser nerd who named himself Madara.
Well, we've already established that he's an uber nerd, so...
Now, I'll expand on them. For the Akurui thing, it's been mentioned heavily before, but it does feel like he kind of has a solution for everything. He's being a teacher, he's being a medic, he's designed the UA security upgrades. Admittedly, I don't have problems with this inherently, but it does feel like he's becoming the Deus Ex Machina, even more so than with Kudai's stupid overpoweredness.
Yeah, so like we kind of talked about this earlier. It's like, yes, he does appear to have a solution for everything, but now he's starting to realize that not everything's so cut and dry with the solutions that he's been creating. Like he's finally starting to catch up with him that there are consequences to what he's been doing.
Yeah.
Which is going to affect him going forward.
Let's do that. But with that said, as I mentioned in one of the previous reviews, it's getting hard for me to get super angry anymore because I'm not really as invested anymore. Maybe I will be down the line, but I still need to see.
That's fair enough.
Now for the Majida thing. Just because you call something out as stupid in the fiction itself doesn't negate the fact that it's stupid.
Well, they're stupid. They do stupid things every now and again. I can't, like, okay, you know what? If you guys already complain enough about how, like, Awkwarder is doing everything right, for lack of a better term, I have to have these characters do stupid things every now and again. Otherwise, you know, if they make the right decision every time, there's no moral ambiguity to be had. There's no internal struggle to be had. Even if it comes out on really small things like this. Like, I can't have them make the right call on every single thing. Otherwise, you know, it just ends up being a not interesting story.
Granted, if I ever have kids, I would probably name them Zelda if they were a girl. So who am I to judge? Still stupid, though. Funny you say that. I have a student on my roster named Link this year.
Robin Williams named his daughter Zelda.
Yep. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. As for the disguise thing, it brings up an interesting point. It's weird how hasn't been any quirk user to put immediate knowledge to that has used their quirk to either get rich or circumvent high prices like they do here with the disguise cosmetics.
So they actually do bring this up a little bit in the third season when Deku, Yairozu, Ida, Kirishima, and Todoroki go to rescue Bakugo. Kirishima, like, once they finish buying all the stuff, Kirishima turns to Yaoyorozu and he's like, hey, wait a minute, why didn't you just use your quirk to make us everything? She's like, that would upset the balance of the economy. She's like, if I just made everything that I needed, that would upset the balance of the economy. So I imagine there's probably limitations on people, using their quirks to
create inflation. Basically.
Yeah. Like, and there's that kid that was getting picked on at Mina and Kirishima's school, where it's like he turned leaves into money or something like that. And like he mentioned that it wears off after a short amount of time, but if that kid grew up to be a villain, he could he could very easily make fake money, and then later on the cash register pulls the stuff open and there's just dead leaves in his drawer.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a thing.
I'm sure it's a thing. I'm sure it's something that has to be watched fairly closely.
Ouch. Quite frankly, with Yaoyorozu existing, there should be people with some kind of similar quirks, who absolutely destroy the economy. This is true. Or at least cause massive overhaul of how society and the economy works. Okay, so that's, basically what we're just saying. Another one of my notes verbatim. Kurai is becoming Moon Knight.
I'm sorry, dude. I have not seen the Moon Knight show. Like, I know very little about Moon Knight. I know that he's like he's like a Marvel anti-hero. He's schizophrenic and he serves this weird moon god. So like he spends half the time like arguing with himself and his other persona. Yeah, it's a trip. And I'm like, I feel like I'd find some of this stuff funny, but I also might like kind of be put off by it given my own struggles in life. Like, I don't think I've ever hallucinated anything.
No,
so I wouldn't relate to that exactly, but like the struggle with one's own sanity that I could see being a little interesting for me. But yeah, I believe I understand the reference of him just like fighting himself basically.
I'm only mainly talking about the split personality thing that's emerging, and this isn't as it is with how you portrayed/changed it, as I have stated in the past.
I don't think I changed any of the rules.
I'm not like I'm already exhausted. Oh,
not
sorry.
Like I'm already not exhausted.
Sorry, dude. It shouldn't be something that anyone has to go through, in my mind.
Yeah, so when I was put in the mental...
Sad to me. That was genuinely really sad. So I can't
no worries.
I'm making it a lot further than I usually do. Being shorter. Granted, this is a massive story that you're writing, so there's 90 chapters in. But at this point in the game, it feels like you're writing something that's the length of Chaucer or something.
I don't understand that reference. I'm
Chaucer,
sorry.
yeah, it's a classic author. Okay.
Okay,
maybe just me. That's just me. We're as bad as Tolkien, right?
Spend like 4 pages describing the caverns underneath Minas Tirith, and it's like, all right, man, I get it. The caves are pretty. Let's move on to the story.
5 pages describing a tree. Yeah.
In this case, 5 chapters describing Kodai's mental deterioration. It's
a lost art. We're a culture of short attention spans. We've there's actually studies. I'm not saying this is you, because everybody likes different type of entertainment.
Yeah.
But there's studies that show that because of the advent of social media and things like TikTok, the human attention span in first world countries has been shortened to like 3 seconds. So it's not even the full length of a TikTok. It's like if the video doesn't get your attention within 3 seconds, you scroll by, right? And so it like unless there's something new that interests you.
Yeah.
So like it's really wild how our brains are being rewired by this technology. And so I think like, I'm not saying this is the case with you because you probably don't even watch TikTok, but like I think a lot of people in our culture in general like have a hard time with really long reads, and I think I'm like that to a certain degree too, because and I think it's partially because I have kids, but it's hard for me to finish a book once I start it. Like I have this novel that I started reading like 6 months ago, and I got like 3/4 of the way through and I still haven't finished it because I put it down one day and it was on a slow chapter because it was kind of a filler chapter, and I just never picked it up again. And so I see that in myself, and I feel like just like to get my brain working again, I need to get back into reading things for enjoyment rather than to just see what happens next. And that's just a personal thing for me. And so I think, it's an art. Some authors are like action, 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 action. And I think this story is partially...
You get a different kind of burnout with that.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of how you used to write. where
It's
everything
very difficult
was
to find a
constant.
balance between the two.
Yeah. And so I think you've been working on trying to pace yourself. And so maybe you're pacing yourself a little too much, but I mean, to a certain extent, I don't know. I enjoy this kind of thing because I like getting to know the characters and their minds and their personalities. I think that's why I love Naruto, is because even though there's so much filler, it's like I'm getting to know the characters in a lot of it, and I'm getting to know why they feel the way they do about the world, where their worldview comes from. And so that's just me. Not everyone likes that, but it's just, finding that balance is interesting. And I think we're discovering that a little bit with your current novel that you're working on, without giving any spoilers away, because it's like I've seen you trying to pace out your action with like slow down times, cool off times, but it has to be done in a way that you're not losing your audience's attention. And so that's probably something to pay attention to.
You have to introduce something new even in the cool down periods, I think, in order to keep the interest going.
Because I've noticed that with a few people commenting. It's like, I want to see what happens next, and all of a sudden there's this thing.
This is part of the learning experience for me.
Yeah. So that's good to know. That it's good to hear from multiple people that like maybe a little too much downtime. We need to kind of pick up the pace and get the plot moving again, because otherwise they're going to lose interest.
Yeah.
So thank you for that feedback.
Yes.
All right. So I lost my place while I was on that tangent. Okay. We've only barely begun to scratch the surface of Midoriya receiving Energon. That's true. And he got it 10 chapters ago. 10 chapters, that was something akin to several thousands of words each. Maybe that's just me, but at the same time, it's getting to the point where the story as one complete narrative from start to finish isn't really well readable.
Real quick on the Midoriya thing, I do want to be touching on Midoriya training with Energon, but the fact of the matter is, like I've said it before, I'll say it again, this is not Deku's story. Deku features very prominently in it, but this isn't a story about Deku. Like he's very heavily involved. I like him very much as a character, but he's not the main character for this story. And like I'm not trying to like push him to the side completely. It's just that the focus isn't entirely on him.
Playing devil's advocate over here, though.
Okay.
You've always said that the reason you write fan fiction is to throw in a pebble and see how far the ripples extend. And he's a major ripple. So like, I mean,
we'll be getting. I'm not saying that we're going to get more Midoriya. We are.
Okay.
We're like this period shall pass. We'll get back into the next arc that's coming up is the third movie arc.
Okay.
That's coming up soon.
Sweet.
And because I actually kind of already planted the seed for that at the end of the second movie, because we saw Fleck turn kind of observing stuff that was happening. And he was saying something about changing plans.
Yeah.
So that movie arc is coming very soon. I will say that we're about to, like, it's not this chapter, but we are getting back to the action soon.
Okay. At least it's not readable unless you're willing to spend hundreds of hours reading page after page. It's just too big for a conventional story. And to that extent, that's kind of the point. It's based on anime/manga, and that's what they do. Okay, so he's not necessarily criticizing, he's just comparing it to like a long-running show. Yeah. But this story, it's not an anime or a manga. It's equivalent of a book, and books don't really work like that. Maybe that's just a specific issue with me too, though. I don't know.
So one of the reasons I describe each section of the story as a phase is more or less to break it up into the idea of like, this is book 1, this is book 2, this is book 3. So like if you want to look at it, and that's like, nobody's going to sit down and read all 7 Harry Potter books at once. Yeah. That'd just be way too much. That's why we break the stories down into novels. I can't exactly do that here with your hero.
Never mind. Sorry.
But how do I put, like, the only other way I could do that is if like I did phase 1 of Your Hero Academia and then ended the story and then started up another one, right? And just started a fresh one. It's like, this is book 2, and you call it part of your series. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want people who had started following the story to stop receiving notifications that it was being updated. Yeah, that would happen. So like that's one of the, I'll call it a disadvantage of publishing on fanfiction.net. But again, the happy medium that I found, at least, was to break things up into phases. So you had phase 1, that's from beginning of the story to Island happening. Then there's phase 2 where, the arm getting torn off thing, that happens. And there's phase 3, he begins his mental struggles, phase 4, phase 5, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to look at it in a novelty, not a novelty, in the sense of reading novels, the different phases are different books.
Got it.
So I hope that clears that. I hope that clears up my thinking on that a little bit.
All right. But let's see. With all that said, it was nice to have another Akurui-centric chapter.
Yeah.
Everybody, he's just everybody's favorite boy. It's interesting to see his thought process, and even after his doubts. Even his own doubts. Genuinely liked seeing his chemistry with Hatsume, but they bounced off each other well.
Yeah, I was like, I don't remember how I had the idea to get them in the room together, but I was just, once I did, I was like, oh, this is going to be so good.
Side note, I genuinely don't know if the Iron Man reference is meant to be referencing the movies or comics, or if it implies that Iron Man existed in this timeline's early days of heroes.
So it's kind of implied that the Marvel superheroes do exist to some degree in the My Hero Academia universe, because Sero's favorite superhero is Spider-Man.
That's true.
Like, he doesn't call him by that, but he describes what is essentially Spider-Man. So I was like, why not? We'll have the Marvel superheroes be not to the same global influence as the Avengers do, but they do exist in America.
Lastly, I have a reference here that is surprisingly I have no recollection I've used in this one in a review already or not. I want to say I have, but screw it.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to take this one.
Okay.
Let's see. All Might. According to Zero, it was around now, when the league attacked in the future, which means that something has changed in the timeline. Akurui. Oh, something changed, all right, and I wish it didn't. Wait, what do you mean by that, Hikari? Since my brother decided to stick his head out of his rear and actually talk to people, he decided to make it his personal mission to screw the League by sending, as of now, no less than 200 death threats to Shigaraki. And before you ask, they aren't able to track him because he sends them by carrier pigeon. Pulls out a massive folder. I have copies of all of them on me, and the most recent one reads as follows. Kurai's letter. Dear Chief Replacement Villain, I wanted to send you this friendly little letter to inform you of your imminent demise. If you're curious about the frequency of which I send these letters, it is merely to instill as much fear as I can, as if basting a turkey, which I will then proceed to murder. Resurrect like I did my own loser nerd butt, dismember, then murder again. That's right, I'm going to murder the fear turkey twice. Follow me on X, the devil from Shadow. Sincerely, Kurai Hikari. All Might, I can't help but ponder the frightful headway we'd make into that sort of energy, if he put that sort of energy into becoming a hero again with One for All. Say what you will, he's acting more of a nuclear deterrent than you did at your prime.
Oh my goodness.
That's a lot of stuff, but I'll try to keep up with the story more in the future. Hope you and Becca have a good one. Silver. Well, thanks for the review, dude.
Yeah, I appreciate you sticking out. I know.
Yeah. And I do appreciate, I make my jokes, I do the pushback, but I do appreciate the criticism because, as I said, this is a learning process for me.
Yeah, and as you're working on something that you actually intend to publish, it's good to keep that in mind, because I think even today we were talking about
some of the pacing,
some falling action that was going to happen, and so you might want to kind of keep it short, and really plant pieces of plot line inside that, because otherwise you don't want to lose.
Well, like I said earlier, even in falling action stuff, you need to introduce new things to keep it interesting to the readers.
And as sad and mortifying as it is, novels are a dying art. There's fewer and fewer people who actually read physical books anymore, and it's so easy.
I mean, as long as my story sells, even on Kindle, I don't really have a problem with that. I would prefer people to buy the paper books, because I can't really sign a Kindle, if that ever becomes a thing. But
but you know what I mean. It's just it's the same thing as any other digital material. It loses your interest, you can just flip to something new in 2 seconds, just when you're on a streaming service. That's how reading is anymore. And so it's, although great authors have been able to do it in the past, it may not be something that is that really, really is effective in capturing an audience. And it's sad, but it's also you have to figure out how to write to really fit that audience that you're now writing for. So thank you guys for the feedback, and let's jump into this new chapter.
Yep, we're going to be doing I'm sure Silver's already gritting his teeth, but we're doing the same events of the month of January, but we're going to do it from Aries' point of view this time. And I'm not, like, it's not going to be,
Silver.
like the same conversations aren't going to be happening the same time over.
Yeah.
It's going to be, same timeline, different point of view, different interactions.
Got it.
So.
All right, let's
guys.
do it.
See you in a minute.
Start to fall as it turns to a pour. We're here again in this storm, but we've been here before. I see the street signs warning, telling me that I have no other place I could go. Feel like I'm stuck in motion, can't find balance. I'm living in a vertigo. Everything is nothing like before. I've tried to hold it together.
In the absence of a hero. Aries stared at herself in the mirror, a little bemused by the sight of UA's student uniform hanging off of her body. Also odd to her searching gaze was the fact that her hair, while dyed black to help obscure her true identity, was shiny, clean, and soft to the touch, the result of proper washing and care. Before her coming to the UA of the past, it had been a very long time since she'd had thought to put any care into her appearance beyond meeting the minimal requirements for hygiene. Probably not since her childhood, now that she thought about it. In the future, safety and anonymity had always been the UA Hero Alliance's top priority, not whether everyone had been able to wash off that day. Eri considered it a miracle that she was even as educated as she was, though that was in no small way thanks to Akaruri and Togata's combined efforts. Her growing up had been a bizarre mixture of running, hiding, training her quirk, and learning what she could about math, reading, writing, history, and science, all in the hopes that someday she would be able to put all that learning to use in a better world. She was snapped out of her reminiscing when there was a familiar knock at her door, preceding Mina's voice asking, "Eri, you good in there?" "Yes, I'm all dressed," she answered as she moved to unlock and open the door to see Mina standing there with her backpack on. "Am I running late?" "Not at all," the other girl replied as she looked her up and down. "Your uniform looks good on you, girl. You all ready for your first day at UA?" Eri allowed a little smile to crease her face as she answered, "I'm pretty nervous. It's actually my first day of school ever." "Wait, what?" "I didn't really have time for a normal education with all of us being on the run all the time in the future," she reminded the pink girl. "By the time I was old enough to be put into an actual school, we were marked for death by the Liberation Front. I never saw the inside of a classroom as an actual student." "Oh, right," Mina said as she scratched her hair awkwardly. "Sorry I brought it up." "You don't need to apologize," Eri assured her. "There's no need to pretend that none of that stuff happened. If it hadn't, I wouldn't be the person I am now." "The person you are now, huh?" Mina murmured, her gaze lowering as she thought something over. "Are you okay?" the future girl inquired, noting that her clock told them they had 15 minutes to get to class. "Yeah, I was just curious about something," Mina answered as she re-shouldered her backpack. "If you don't want to answer, it's totally cool, but I was kind of wondering, what was I like in the future?" Eri moved to get her own backpack, which had been provided for her, along with her basic bedding and wardrobe, by Aizawa. Doing so gave her enough time to formulate her response, though she had been expecting for the inquiry for some time now, having been asked the same question by a few of the other students in their class. As she moved to exit the room, she answered the pink girl, "You might not like what I tell you." "I kind of figured," Nina said with a more rueful expression. "I'm guessing that Kurai staying dead didn't do me any favors in the future." To put it mildly, Eri nodded as she shut the door behind her. "I honestly can't remember a day when you smiled. When we first went on the run, I remember the others talking about how you used to be the one who smiled first in the group, how you loved showing off your dance skills. I remember the concert you guys put on when I was little, and Creati told me that it had been you who put together the dance number that everyone worked so hard on, so I knew they were telling the truth about how you used to be. But honestly, I never saw that person after what happened on Nabu Island. All I saw was someone full of hurt and resentment." Mina wilted at those words before she mumbled, "Sounds like I turned out to be a real piece of work." "I wouldn't say that," Eri replied as they reached the elevators. "You weren't cruel or even unkind to anyone in the Alliance.
as long as I knew you. Your resentment was entirely directed at our enemies, which apparently made you a terror on the battlefield. Outside of all the fighting, you just seemed sad all the time. At one point, I overheard Akururi chewing you out for trying to get yourself killed on what was supposed to be a hit-and-run mission. Judging from how much yelling was happening, it probably wasn't the first time you'd argued about it. I guess some things will never change. Mina laughed hollowly as she pushed the button to summon the lift. But it makes sense that I would do that. The whole time that Kurai was dead, I knew that I'd never get to see him again in this life. Everything seemed so pointless. It makes sense that I'd try to do whatever I could to go be with him. Perking up with another awkward smile, she added, I guess that sounds pretty lame, right? I wouldn't know, Eri answered honestly. I don't think I know what it means to be in love, so I have no idea what losing someone who means everything to me would feel like. I've been scared to lose friends, and I've grieved for them when they've gone, but I doubt that any of that compares to what you lost, Ashley Queen. What's with the hero name? Mina said with a slight tilt of her head. I told you to call me Mina. Sorry, Eri apologized as the elevator finally arrived. In the future, I only ever called all of you by your hero names. Using your actual names still feels weird to me. Better get used to it now that we're classmates and all, her companion replied, still smiling. Going to school, Eri replied with a little laugh of her own as they stepped into the lift. Here's something I never thought I'd get to do, and with my heroes, no less. Well, you should count yourself among those heroes while you're at it, Mina told her with a small nudge from her shoulder. You brought Kurai back to me, and even if that makes me selfish, it makes you my hero. Eri blushed at the praise, ducking her head as the doors closed in front of them. Even so, that didn't stop her from saying, Thank you, Mina. Classes were more difficult to sit through than Eri had initially thought they would be, but she said nothing in the way of a complaint, doing her best to take notes diligently and answer the few questions that were thrown her way throughout the day. She got most of the answers right, though she wasn't exactly sure if it was because the teachers were giving her easier questions or if the notes she was taking were making enough of a difference in her short-term memory to let her get by. The strangest part of the experience on her first day was that she had been told to take Kurai's seat in each room, since it was now vacant. The old adage about walking a mile in someone else's shoes echoed in her head several times throughout the day as a result. It was with a trace of black humor that she also thought it must be karmic justice for bringing Kurai back to life against his will, her now having to step up and take his place in more ways than one. When time came for combat practice and she went to change into her hero costume, the same getup she had been wearing when she had broken onto campus, she was surprised to find a pair of white bracelets in the case along with her tights and cape. Each one felt a little heavier than it looked, and it had a small black button on the back, though she had no idea what purpose they were supposed to serve. She was about to put them back in the case when she noticed there was a slip of paper clipped to the inside of the lid, so she pulled it out and unfolded it to find a note in familiar handwriting. Eri, the note began. In addition to your repaired costume, you'll find a pair of compressed gloves that will assist you in controlling your quirk's physical applications. Midoriya used a similar support item when he fought alongside my brother and All Might on Eye Island in order to draw out his full power, and my version is more durable. Still, I advise not using 100% of your quirk all the time. They're not as good as Kurai's arm. There were also instructions on how to apply and take off the items after they had been activated, so she made sure to memorize them quickly. Thanks, Akururi, she murmured, a little smile decorating her lips as she put the note back and slipped the two bracelets on her wrists. The support items were a welcome addition to her costume. Up until now, she had been using Rewind at the same time as One for All in order to keep from blasting her arms and legs off, but sometimes her concentration could slip, and she would end up needing an extra moment to focus on reversing the damage done to her body, which could prove fatal in a real battle. If these bracelets worked as intended, her reaction time and battle prowess would increase dramatically. Once Eri was fully dressed, she tapped the button on her wrists, only being slightly surprised when the item glowed and expanded to cover her entire hand and forearm in white armor that moved smoothly with her hand and fingers. She could make a fist easily enough, but she did note that she wasn't exactly going to be writing kanji since the finer motor points were slightly impeded by the light metal's presence. She was about to laugh to herself at the thought that Akururi was slipping up on his designs, but then she remembered that she was comparing the boy to a version of himself that had yet to come about. With a sigh that expressed her sense of loss for her future friends, she shut the suitcase and put it into her locker, one of the few things she hadn't inherited from Kurai. Shaking off the morose thoughts, she went to join the other girls, who had already changed into their hero costumes, having finished well before her due to the speed earned from constant practice. That was okay, though. She was confident she wouldn't be left behind when it came to the actual exercise. That confidence turned out to be well-versed, thanks to her extensive training from Togata, Akururi, and even Bakugo whenever he had felt like it in her future. Since everyone else had just come back from their first week of work studies for the new semester, the teachers had decided it would be a prudent measure for their students to test them against robots to see what they could do when they did apply and take off the items so when they did not have to hold back. Officially, Eri was interning with Gran Torino, one of the few who knew the complete story about One for All and her appearance within this time. In actuality, she had been busy during the winter break taking a crash course designed by Akaruri to help her get ready for school life. She hadn't even met the elderly hero yet. Still, even though the others had further mastered their quirks with the help of their new mentors, Eri had an advantage that they did not when it came to combat. The students of UA had studied how to use their powers and how to make the best use of them. Eri had grown up in a world where learning how to fight wasn't an option, even for a child. It was a way of life. To a newly strengthened Eri, the lumbering robots were nothing more than walking targets made of flimsy scrap metal. When she was given 15 targets to take out as quickly as she could, she activated the gauntlets and went to work without a word, lightning crackling the slipstream she left behind her. She punched straight through the 3 of them without blinking before lashing out with a reverse kick that sent the pieces flying into another 5 of the drones that left each of them as smoldering piles of junk. Almost simultaneously, she leaped up so that she wound up descending toward one of the 0-point robots from above. Her red cape swirling around her as she prepared her next move, something she had admittedly not tried before but now seemed as good a time as any. Whirling herself like a high-speed corkscrew, she barreled toward the massive robot, lightning blazing in her eyes across the right gauntlet as she drew her fist back. Howitzer! Smash! She went through the giant like a hot knife through butter, and the wind and lightning pressure built up inside of it to cause a devastating explosion that destroyed it from the inside, sent its parts flying in every direction, leaving the remaining, smaller robots in a similar state by the time the screaming winds and heat waves had settled down. Once everything was still on the testing ground, Eri leaped out of the remnants and landed lightly in front of the instructors and the other students, many of whom were looking stunned at her display. Well done, Eri. Aizawa nodded before anyone else could speak. This was enough to keep most of his students quiet with continued surprise, but of course, there was one student in particular who was irritated by the outcome. Teacher's pet, Bakugo growled. Where do you One for All losers get off on using my moves, huh? Get your own style, quit stealing from mine! I believe the saying goes that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Eri answered as she walked toward them, seemingly unperturbed by his negativity. I learned from the best in the future, yourself included, Ground Zero. Now that I have the responsibility of wielding the greatest quirk in the world, I felt it made sense to model my fighting style after people like you and Lemillion. For a second, it seemed like this would mollify the explosive team. If you're gonna copy me, then do it right! Don't call it a howitzer unless it leaves the ground underneath you on fire! Yes, sir. Eri replied with a small incline of her head that left Bakugo looking befuddled. Off to the side, Ochako was asking, anyone else think this is kind of weird? Izuku grinned a little as he replied, this actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Kachan was one of the people who survived in the future for the longest, so it makes sense she'd have grown up looking to him for approval, especially after he became the leader of the Alliance. Maybe, but I bet you anything that your approval's the one she's going to be after the most. Mina answered as Bakugo started going on a rant about what else Eri needed to do before she could even think about trying to pass off her last attack as an ultimate move derived from his fighting style. You and Kurdai saved her as a little girl, and you were the leader who lasted the longest against Shigaraki in the future. She thinks the world of you guys. She's got a point, Ochako commented. Little Eri always gets the most excited whenever you go to visit her, and I imagine those feelings have only gotten stronger over time. You're her hero like All Might is your hero, Deku. As if, by coincidence, Eri skipped lightly over to where the 3 students had been talking among themselves before stopping in front of Izuku and asking, How'd I do, Deku? He immediately favored her with a smile and the words, You were amazing, Eri. Or should I call you Lemillion? Cronoa, actually. She grinned sheepishly as she bounced on the balls of her feet. I figured it might be better for Lemillion's branding if he didn't have a heroine with the same name competing on the market after he graduates. So I came up with a different alias, Cronoa, the temporal heroine. I'll be the hero who turns back the hands of time for those who endure tragedy. Interesting, Izuku murmured. You're telling people about your rewind power without actually calling it as such, while also alluding to your ability to reverse time itself, which could be kind of risky, but seeing as All Might went 40 years without ever revealing his quirk's name or origins to the public, it's not impossible to believe that she can create enough mystique to obscure her true power and its capabilities. As he continued to spiral into one of his mumbling episodes, Eri looked over at Ochako and asked, Has he always done this? Ever since I've known him, the Gravity Girl answered with a grin. It's been a while since I've seen him do it, though. Not since our matchup against Class B last semester, right? Mina asked, which Ochako confirmed. Oh yeah, speaking of those guys, I heard that the other Americans are supposed to be arriving sometime this week. They'll be joining Mr. Khan's class since we already got Team Ruby. I heard a lot about Team Juniper growing up, but I've never actually met any of them, Eri commented. In my future, they were one of the key resistance groups in North America, kind of like how we were in Japan. If they're cut from the same cloth as everyone in Team Ruby, they've got to be amazing. Ochako murmured. I wonder what they're like. Eri opened her eyes and let out a frustrated sigh as she looked at the expectant face of All Might, which quickly took on a disappointed characteristic as he realized she had been unable to succeed yet again. I don't understand it, she sighed as she uncrossed her legs and set them on the floor in front of the couch on the teacher's lounge. It's as if ever since I revived Kai, the vestiges won't talk to me. This wasn't the first time she had tried to contact the past users of One for All within her subconscious without them replying, but now it was becoming worrying and more than a little frustrating. It had been a few days since she had started attending school with the other students when All Might had finally approached her about training One for All, with the assistance of Izuku and Akadori. She had readily agreed, being aware that they knew more about how the quirk functioned than anyone else alive, Sans Kurai, but he wasn't exactly in a position to help her right now. He had started by seeing what she could handle without using Rewind in tandem to repair the damage done to her body by higher levels of power output. It turned out she could readily use about 15% of the quirk without hurting herself, but pushing anything past about a third of the limit without Rewind or the support gauntlets was going to start breaking bones. Her toughened body gave her a respectable start, and unlike when Izuku had started his training, she already knew how to fight pretty well. She wasn't well-muscled, which would need to change if she was going to wield One for All at full power without the assistance of her first quirk, but that would only come with time. Other than that one drawback, it seemed like she would have had a smooth track to mastering the quirk in all of its aspects, which of course is why her current predicament was frustrating to both her and the eighth wielder of the quirk. Perhaps the vestiges are resting, or they don't think they need to say anything right now. All Might guessed as he looked down at his tea. It may be hard for them to talk to you, young Eri. Young Midoriya needed to be able to control 25% of his power before the other users spoke with him, and they couldn't do it for very long. Maybe we need to wait until you're able to use the quirk more easily before they are able to manifest again. That just doesn't feel right, Eri said as she scowled down at her hands which had clenched on her thighs. They never said anything about me needing to unlock more of the power to maintain contact, which I feel like at least one of them would have mentioned before we lost touch. I'm starting to wonder if All for One's doctor didn't succeed in extracting the secondary quirks from yours. We'll mention it to young Hikari to see if he has any theories as to why the problem is persisting. All Might sighed. My apologies for having you worked for so long on a seemingly fruitless endeavor. No, I'm sorry I can't figure out what's wrong, Eri replied somberly. I know I haven't had this power for long, but Kai and Deku and everyone else who had this power before entrusted it to me. I can't help but feel like I'm not living up to my potential as the 11th wielder because I don't know what I'm doing. She had to admit to herself that it was strange to be sitting across from the man that everyone in the future had revered as a legend, only to find that he was a surprisingly normal person. She had seen him around when she was little at UA, but she'd never really had a reason to interact with him very much before he had been killed by the Liberation Front. Young Eri, let me tell you a little-known secret among us One for All wielders, the blonde man said with a weak chuckle. None of us really knew what we were doing either. I think the one exception to that rule might be young Midoriya, but it still stands. What do you mean, sir? That boy always knew the why of what he was doing whenever he used One for All. All Might sighed wistfully. Every time he used it, he made sure that someone else would be able to smile because of it, and for nothing else. I suppose that's true. Eri agreed with a faint smile of her own. It's been years for me, but I can remember it as if it were yesterday when he took me up into the sky and gave me that smile that said everything would be okay. After a moment of thought, she added, he never lost that smile, you know. Oh? Up until the day he died, Deku smiled at people while he saved them, she informed her instructor. He said that people who need rescuing have probably been through something really scary, and they need someone to show them that they're going to be okay. Maybe that's why it's so easy for me to remember how he saved me all those years ago. He just never stopped doing what he did best. When All Might said nothing at first, Eri wondered if his thoughts had gone astray, but then she noticed the film of tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. That's what my master told me when I was first learning how to use One for All, he said softly. She told me that those who can always smile are the strongest. And Deku was the strongest of all your students, Eri said with a sad smile of her own. He lived out your ideals to the end of what can only be called the worst of times. The worst of times, huh? All Might murmured. His eyes suddenly sharpened, and he looked at Eri with a new level of interest as he asked, Do you know what happened to All for One in your future? The man, not the quirk. I do, Eri nodded solemnly. He was killed in prison the same day that the Liberation Front attacked UA. What? By a guard? All Might could barely form the words as they came. No, Eri said with a swift shake of her head. I don't know all the details, but by all accounts, it was a freak accident. Before the retired pro could ask for details, she went on to say, One of the automated turrets had a glitch and opened fire, killing him almost instantly. We lived in fear that the front would try to jailbreak Law because we didn't find out his death until after Deku joined the UA alliance and started coordinating pockets of resistance. By then, of course, Shigaraki had revealed that he also had the power to take and give quirks, so it's a problem. On the other hand, I'm sure a lot of them were relieved that they didn't have to deal with two of the same kind. Have I said something to upset you, sir? No. All Might said as he waved the matter aside. I'm sorry to keep making you relive what must be painful memories, young Eri. I'm supposed to be helping you with One for All, and here I am essentially asking to trade war stories. Well, we've more or less hit a wall on what to do with One for All right now. Eri shrugged with a slightly rueful grin. We should have Principal Nezu and Akurui observe during our next session if at all possible. Maybe they'll be able to see something that we're missing. It's worth a shot. All Might agreed as he stood up, his student moving quickly to do the same. Thank you for your time, young Eri. I'll keep doing what research I can on the past users of One for All. For now, concentrate on your studies. You're doing very well so far. Thank you, sir, she replied as she gathered up her bags. I'll see you in class tomorrow. You've talked about wanting to go get better so you can go home, which is an important step in recovery, but I think it's time we looked at what that means to you. A young woman with bright red skin and sapphire eyes looked up from her notepad to see Kurai staring down at his folded hands, as he often did when deep in thought. You've come along very well these last couple of weeks, Kaiba, considering all that you've been through. I honestly don't see you needing to stay with us for too long, which means that you need to start considering what direction you want your life to take once you leave our care. Since you no longer aspire to be a hero, what does progress outside of this hospital look like for you? The lady's name was Sayuri, and since Kurai had been put in Itamori Hospital, he had been seeing her twice a week for counseling sessions to help him restructure his thought process so that when the time came for him to leave, he would have a better control of his emotional state. He had learned many coping mechanisms for dealing with anger as he grew up, but Sayuri had been helping him to apply those teachings to other excess emotions that could hinder his daily life if he did not get them under control. Kurai didn't answer right away, and when he did, he spoke in a slow, methodical tone. I actually talked about that with my closer friends before I even came here, and what I had in mind still seems like a good career for me, he murmured. I was thinking about changing to a psychology major so that I could pursue counseling. Even if I can't fight on behalf of innocent people anymore, I still think that I'm meant to help others in another capacity. Despite his initial claims that he no longer wanted to focus on assisting others when his own life was such a mess, he had been unable to think of any other career paths that would sit well with his disposition. Talking his thoughts out and analyzing them in counseling had helped him to understand that even if his reckless tendencies had caused him to be so badly injured and killed, switching to a life that lacked the capacity to assist others in any manner was out of the question. Counseling, Sayuri mused as she made another note. Why do you feel as though that would be a good fit for you? Keep in mind we're focusing on your well-being and not that of others for the moment. It's admirable that you still feel the need to help those around you, but we're working to get you better before that can happen. It's what I've always done, Kurai answered with a shrug. So my father taught me to do, and his father before him. That's not to say that I feel an obligation to follow in their footsteps, but it is a large part of my upbringing. It's too large a part of who I am to just set it aside in a half-hearted pursuit of some other career. I also know that empathy is a very powerful thing, especially in this kind of field of work. With everything that I've been made to endure, I think it'd be hard to find a person whose suffering I couldn't relate to. Looking up at his counselor with a wry smile, he added, People will hardly listen to someone in these kinds of situations who hasn't suffered like they have, much less take their advice. Sayuri returned the smile before saying, I suppose you have a point. Similar to Kurai, she had lost her parents to a villain attack when she was in middle school, though she had been raised by her grandparents. The same attack had left her without her left hand's 2 small fingers, and a rough series of scars on the same side of her body. Kurai had no doubt that it was for those reasons that Dr. Kentaro had referred her as his attending counselor, but he also had to admit that it lent him it had lent him to heeding her words more than if she were just some person who had a degree in psychology. Now she looked at him with a grim expression as she said, I can see that you feel very strongly about this, which is often a good thing. However, I need to have you consider that whether or not you would be able to handle the stress that comes with this kind of job. I can tell you it isn't easy hearing about all the atrocities that people have to endure in this superhuman society of ours. It can wear on you, and given the degree to which you've broken down before coming here, it may not be healthy for you to take on those kinds of burdens. After all, you'd be responsible not only for maintaining your own well-being, but also that of the people who come to you for help. Kurai's gaze fell back toward his lap as he answered, "You told me that it was important to have a support system at home that I trust, and I do. I trust them to keep me from getting to this point again. They weren't able to stop you this time," Sayuri reminded him, though not unkindly. "What makes you think that they can do so from now on?" "We didn't know what was wrong with me last time," the boy responded quickly. "Even if we still don't have a diagnosis for whatever problem I've developed, I can't get out of here until it's been recognized and medicated appropriately. After that, they'll know what to be on the lookout for and help me to safeguard against it. I don't intend to make them do all the work, but having them watching out for me would certainly help me feel more at ease and confident that I could get through the challenges that life throws at me, career or otherwise." The counselor nodded before making another note as she said, "It's good that you can still place so much trust in other people. Most people who come to me trust no one but themselves, which is probably what skews their perception in the first place," Kurai remarked dryly. Probably. Eri had come in from another training session with All Might when she was surprised to see 4 newcomers in her dorm's common space. They were spread across the room, so she might have missed them if it weren't for the excited Ruby practically bouncing off the walls as she greeted the other teenagers as old friends. Before Eri could make her way over, Izuku walked up with a smile and said, "Emery, glad you made it in time to meet our new schoolmates." To the newcomers, he added, "This is the friend I was telling you about. She's kind of new to our school, too." The girl smiled politely in return as she realized these people were probably the new transfers from America. "Hello," she said by way of greeting as they came to stand in front of the quartet, each of them wearing pleasant looks as they gathered to meet her. "I'm Emiri Hikota. It's nice to meet all of you." "Hey," said a young man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. "I'm Jean Arc. The pleasure's all mine." He was well-muscled for their age group, though nowhere near as sculpted as Mirio. Even so, Eri could make out the beginnings of the images she had grown up seeing when people talked about the immovable hero, Huntsman. "Hi there," giggled a short girl with orange hair and a healthy dusting of freckles on her cheeks and nose. Her pale jade-colored eyes stared at Eri from very close until she stepped back and touched Eri on the nose as she chirped, "Boop." "Nora, we discussed this," Jean sighed. "Name first, then touching faces. Maybe." "Sorry." The girl called Nora grinned as she hopped backward, a full pace before addressing a confused-looking Eri again. "Back in the States, I'm commonly known as the Queen of the Castle. My friends call me Nora, but I guess you guys go by last names here. So I guess I'm Valkyrie." Putting her hands on her hips, she declared, "That's right, Yue. Nora Valkyrie is here to dominate." Dominate what?" Eri asked in an aside to Izuku, who shrugged helplessly. "No idea," he told her in a lowered tone. "She seems kind of out of it. Might be overtired from the jet lag." "Yeah, you're probably right," she murmured. Still, she found it hard to believe that the small, hyperactive giggle machine in front of her was going to become the legendary hero Magnhild, who was said to be able to crush hundreds of villains with thunder itself. Even as Eri was recalling the tales concerning the woman, Nora ran off, something new apparently having seized her attention. "Good evening," said a soft-spoken young man with long black hair that he kept tied back in a ponytail. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance. I am Lai Ren." A single magenta stripe ran through his bangs on the left side of his head that matched his eerily intense eyes. "He's the shinobi hero Tempest. Or at least he will be." In the future, Tempest had been a hero who struck terror into the hearts of many villains across North America. He was calculating, thorough, some had even called him ruthless. Once he had a target, he never gave up the chase, and even unto Eri's last days in the future, no one but his closest friends had known what his quirk was, though many theorized it to be some kind of stealth ability. His enemies had described him as a storm that struck out of nowhere, annihilating everything in its path, only to fade into the horizon without a trace before it could be tamed. "Hello, Hikota," said a now strikingly beautiful girl with bright red hair and emerald green eyes. "I am Pura Nikos. It's very lovely to meet you." Her voice was soft, but there was an underlying strength that was also evident in her carriage. Her back was perfectly straight, she maintained eye contact with no difficulty, and her pronunciation was fluid enough that Japanese could have been her first language. "I hope that being in different classes won't prevent any camaraderie between all of us." "It's very nice to meet you," Eri replied as she inclined her head politely. "So she's Axios." Unlike the other members of Team Juniper, Pyrrha had not been known for her feats of daring in the war against villains the world over, but rather her sudden and tragic end at the very beginning of the never-ending battles. When the Paranormal Liberation Front overthrew the current government in Japan, other criminal organizations across the globe became emboldened to strike more openly. One such organization, known as the White Fang, moved to destabilize things in Texas, and many heroes and students from Second Amendment were set to fight. During the very first battle, Axios had died when she had opted to stay behind and bought her allies enough time to retreat by holding off nearly 100 villains on her own. Her name was immortalized. Many others took up the fight against other villains after that, having been enraged at the thought of a child hero being made to die in the place of far more capable heroes. Of course, that outrage could only last for so long, and before too long had passed, only her closest friends had continued to fight for the cause in her name. Putting the thoughts aside, Aerie reminded herself that these young people were going to go on to become different heroes than the ones she had heard tale of. After all, Team Juniper had never come to Japan to assist UA in her future, so their paths had already been drastically altered. With that in mind, she brightened her smile and asked, "How was your flight coming here?" "The flight went as smoothly as it could, for our team anyway," Pyrrha said with a slightly knowing smile that Ren seemed to mirror, even if only for a second. "Tell that to my dinner," Jean grumbled as he rubbed his stomach. "Crow's driving took care of my lunch, too." "That guy drives like a crazy roller coaster," Nora giggled as she ran by, apparently trying to catch Dark Shadow, while Tokoyami could only look on in utter bewilderment. "Come back, Bertie!" "Sorry, but Dad could have been driving and it had been the same results for their fearless leader." Yang chuckled as she approached the group. "Right, Vomit Boy?" "I thought I told you not to call me that!" Jean protested as he turned red with embarrassment. "She's not wrong," Ruby said as she went running after Nora. "Way to sell me out, Crater Face! That explosion was an accident! Quit picking on my sister!" Yang growled as her eyes flared red, causing Jean to yelp and hide behind Ren, who just looked on with a vague interest. "Please don't fight in here," Izuku pleaded. "Mr. Aizawa will choke us all with his scarf if we break something again." "Again?" Pyrrha asked, looking a little concerned. "Are fights very common at this school?" "No," Izuku said quickly. We had an incident a few days before Christmas, and there was a big mess that our teachers had to clean up. We've kind of been walking on eggshells ever since." "Please don't think too badly of our school based on a single incident," Aerie hurried to add. "It's actually really nice to live here." "Fights don't really worry us," Jean said as Yang moved on to break up an entanglement between Ruby, Nora, and Dark Shadow. Looking at Pyrrha and Ren, he asked, "Remember that food fight after Thanksgiving break?" "How could we forget?" Ren asked dryly. "Ruby turned all of us into a modern art exhibit before Vice Principal Goodwood showed up." "At least the headmaster convinced her to take it easy on us," Pyrrha reminded them. "Personally, I think he found it all rather amusing." "What did you guys do?" Izuku asked them with a quizzical tilt to his head. "They lost." Yang grinned as she walked by, dragging Ruby by her collar, while Nora clung stubbornly to a now-defeated Dark Shadow and Tokoyami. "Says the girl who got chucked out of the building," Nora cackled as she was dragged. As the other Americans laughed at their friends, or in Ren's case, simply smiled, Aerie and Izuku could only look at one another with the thought that no matter what the Paranormal Liberation Front, when they decided to attack, they wouldn't be lacking for interesting times in the interim. That weekend, she had her first formal training session with her younger self. The little girl was clearly nervous, and with good reason, but Aerie was confident that she would be able to help her gain control of her power sooner rather than later. In her time, she had been trained in secret by Akaruri while under Togata's supervision. There had been some guesswork involved on his part, and it was difficult to keep the then-crippled boy alive, much less able to communicate while they hid from Shigaraki's forces. Still, after a few months of fumbling with control of her unstable quirk, she managed to develop a sense for how to release her power, stored up in her horn, which eventually allowed her to restore Lemillion's quirk, as well as save Akaruri's life by reverting his body to the state that it had been in before he forced his solar intelligence into overdrive on Eye Island. She had been made to master her fears regarding her quirk and passed in order to keep herself from using Rewind in an all-or-nothing manner, much like how Izuku had once struggled to properly utilize One for All at manageable levels. In its natural state, her quirk amassed energy that could be vented either by her own will or bursting when her body could no longer contain the power. Initially, this meant that her training periods had been somewhat sporadic, as her body did not always build up energy at the same pace, and it had to reach a certain level before she could try to forcefully activate it. However, as she got older, her body amassed the necessary power more quickly, allowing her to practice more often until she could use her quirk as easily as she could walk. From there, she had gone on to master specific aspects of Rewind, such as regenerating certain parts of the body while leaving others alone, or rewinding a person's body to the point before genetics had developed to create quirks without killing them as a byproduct of the reversal. She could even rewind her own body to repair damage done to her in battle, though her body did not replenish the energy she spent as a result of the reversal. Over the years, she had also tried to increase her power limit in various ways, but had never been successful, even with Akaruri's attempts to help. Now that she had One for All, though, she did not have to wait for her body to stockpile the energy needed for her quirk to function. She had all the power she could want to feel the quirk. Her horn could go from a small bump on her head to a full-size protrusion in less than a second if she so wished. Still, that fact wasn't going to help her younger self right now, she had to remind herself. She would have to rely upon the lessons she had learned as a result of trial and error during her early childhood. At least she won't have to learn anything by making the same mistakes that I did, she thought with a slightly rueful grin as she plodded through the snowscape that had become UA. It didn't take her long for her to arrive at the teacher's dorm, and her face brightened considerably when she saw a familiar face sitting on one of the benches out front. Togota gave her a cheery smile and a wave as she jogged over to stand within easy speaking distance. "Hi, Lemillion," she said once she'd stopped moving. "What's shaking, Harry?" he replied cheerfully. "The class is running you over yet?" "A little bit, yes," she admitted as she cast her gaze downward for a moment. "School's a lot harder than I thought it would be. I always assumed that trying to find a safe house from villains was the hardest thing to master, but then Mr. Ectoplasm handed us 3 pages of trigonometry." She shuddered as she remembered the confusing swirl of numbers and letters that she had tried to make sense of for hours on end, with very limited success. "Yeah, classes always kicked my butt like crazy, and I don't have the excuse of growing up in the apocalypse," Mirio chuckled while he scratched his head abashedly. "Still, a hero's got to do what a hero's got to do, am I right?" "You are right." Ari grinned back at him. The expression became a little more rueful as she added, "Being in class with everyone I grew up looking to for guidance and protection, now they're talking to me like an equal. It's cool, but it kind of makes my head spin at the same time." She resolved to tell him at a later time about her attempts to interact with other students at their invitation during a less pressing time, because she was certain he would get quite a laugh out of them. He'd probably like the bit about Red Riot trying to induct me into the Horn Buddies Club with Ashid Queen. She thought as she repressed a giggle at the memory of Kirishima insisting that the members of their group greeted one another by activating their quirks and then butting heads. She'd had the feeling that he was pulling her leg, but decided to oblige, and had later gotten a stern talking to from Recovery Girl about why someone with One for All shouldn't go around headbutting her friends. Talking to Lemillion was no different than it had been in the future, something that aided her greatly in settling into the current time period. He had been taken aback by her story at first, but after the initial shock, he had accepted her with the same friendliness and warmth he had her younger self. He made time for her whenever he could, provided he wasn't busy with little Ari, and he always managed to make her laugh, or at least smile, with bad jokes and stories about his failures as Sir Night-Eye's apprentice. He talked to her like she was another friend from UA and not an oracle of doom like many others had regarded her as. She knew it wasn't on purpose, so she bore no resentment for the fact, but she had noticed that in spite of their attempts to welcome her with open arms, the other students always had a slight edge in the way they approached and interacted with her. Even Izuku, who she had enjoyed getting reacquainted with, always had just a hint of a shadow about him whenever they spoke, as if he felt guilty for his part in causing her to become the newest soldier in the war against All for One. Mirio swept those thoughts aside as he gestured toward the doors in an excited fashion before saying, "We gotta go in and warm up, yeah? Little Ari's horn has been getting kind of achy, so Mr. Aizawa figured it was time for us to start up her training for real. I'll make some tea so we have a tea party in her room while you two talk quirks. Sound good?" "Peachy," she grinned, causing him to laugh. "You remembered," he said with evident delight. "Don't worry, I made sure to get some apples for you two to snack on. I tried to get Sato from Class 1A to make some candy apples, but Mr. Aizawa was being a real grumpy Gus and said that little Aries had way too much sugar this week. I'm like, come on, man. It's snowy outside. It's practically a rule that kids are supposed to have too much sugar when it's time like this." "I'll see if I can sneak some over the next time I come," Ari giggled, though she had to admit her favorite snack was sounding pretty nice right about now. As they reached the doors, she found herself pausing before she turned to Togata and said, "Can I ask a question, Lemillion?" "Shoot," he said, drawing back from opening the door, having sensed that she wanted to finish the topic at hand before they went in. "How do you find it in you to smile and make people feel better all the time?" she asked him. "I know your life hasn't been easy, especially given what you lost trying to protect Kai and me, but you always made time to get me to smile, both now and in the future. How do you do it?" Togata appeared to mull the question over for a moment before he shrugged and answered, "I guess that even though there's a bunch of reasons for me to be sad, I try to remember all the reasons I have to smile are more important. Your safety and happiness is more important than me having a superpower, so I do what I can to make sure that you and little Ari have a reason to smile. It's honestly that simple." "That's simple, huh?" Ari chuckled softly as she looked down at her snow-encrusted boots. "I don't know why I was expecting something more elaborate, but I guess the important things can often be easier to think about than we believe them to be." "In concept, sure," Togata said ruefully. "Putting it into practice might be a little hard to follow through sometimes, but I think that it's worth it, especially when I get to see one of you two smiling back at me, you know? Not really, but maybe I'll get some idea of what you're talking about once I can help her understand that she doesn't really have to be afraid of our power, Ari admitted. I never really got to save anyone in the future, unfortunately. I was able to heal our friends when I needed to, but it always felt like I was just postponing their deaths a little bit so that Shigaraki's thugs could have another shot at them later on. I feel like I never really got to save a life, and when I thought that I had saved Kai, it turns out I only dragged him back into his personal hell. Togata looked at her with a somber expression for a few seconds before he said, "You may not have been able to save Hikari the way that you imagined you would be able to, but I'm pretty sure you saved everyone around him from a lot of misery and heartache in the long run. Sure, things were looking pretty rough there for a minute, but he's trying to get better for their sake, right? And that just might make all the difference when Shigaraki and the Liberation Front come at us." Kai doesn't want to be a hero, though. Eri sighed as she moved to open the door. So what does it matter in the end? I wasn't talking about Hikari when I said that it might make a difference, Togata told her as he kept his hand on the handle that she was unable to enter just yet. All of Hikari's friends know what he had to go through to save them, and now that he's back with them, I'm sure they'll fight twice as hard to return that favor to him. And that's what'll make the difference that I was talking about. And when that comes to pass, who knows how many people they'll save with their efforts. The senior beamed at her as he added, "When the sun rises on our friend's win, we'll all know that it was thanks to you and your courage, Harry." The girl felt heat creeping into her face as her hero poured his praise for her at her feet, wanting to deny that her efforts would truly make such a difference, but she couldn't do it. Lemillion's encouragement and belief in her meant too much for her to try and sweep them aside as mere fantasies. So she shuffled her feet awkwardly and managed to mumble out, "I'm glad that you believe in me, even if I still can't bring myself quite to do it. That does mean a lot to me." "Hey, come on," Togata laughed as he opened the door for her. "I can't have my favorite peach going sour on me, right? So let's go and make sure it doesn't happen to either of you." With that, he moved inside and made for the elevator that would lead him up to little Aries' room, where she was awaiting the heroes who would finally deliver her from the fear of her own accursed power. She came back to the dorms to find the days continued to creep by slowly, with irregular contact from Kurai until the last week of January, when he was given permission to have his phone by his doctor. He had said that he believed Kurai had reached a point in his counseling where it would benefit him to have his support group on hand if he needed them, so the arrangements were made to have the device returned to him after nearly a month of having to write letters and exchanging brief calls with a lounge phone, where there was very little privacy. Mina had wanted to be the one to take the device to him, but her work schedule did not allow for it, so Ari and Ochako had once again donned their disguises as Kurai's cousins in order to make the visit. They weren't able to spend very long with him in person since the approval went through on a school night, but it was clear that he was glad to see them, even if only for a little while. The visit also did Ari a lot of good, seeing her childhood hero on a path to recovery from the tragedy that she felt she had inflicted upon him. While it wasn't safe to say that he was back to his old self, there were hints of his former confidence and humor emerging from the haunted, fragile shell he had become. He was also clearly glad to have a way to communicate more easily with his friends and family, and it was noticeable that once he had his phone back, Mina spent a fair amount of her limited free time in her room. Free time in general had become somewhat a scarce commodity for the students of the hero course of UA, with all of them having to undertake a work study that took up a lot of their off hours. In Ari's case, she was being made to study extra hard during those hours under Aizawa's unforgiving gaze, and sometimes it felt as though her brain was going to burst from the amounts of information she was trying to retain. Even so, she never complained or voiced her frustrations, and her teacher eventually surprised her by asking her why that was after one particularly difficult modern history art exam. "Why should I complain?" She shrugged as she gathered her things so that she could head back to the dorms. "There are people out there who are a lot worse off than I am, and there will be many more like them if we aren't ready when the war begins. I don't have time to be wasting on complaining about how hard this all is for me." "You might want to rethink that," he said softly, which confused the girl. This was a man who tolerated no backtalk and even less complaining from his students, and now he was telling her that she should spend time bemoaning her lot in life? Seeing the expression of bewilderment on her face, Aizawa sighed before he told her, "I've noticed that ever since Hikaru was put in the hospital, you've kept to yourself to such a degree that I doubt is healthy, given your age and circumstances. I'm not saying you should start wearing your heart on your sleeve, but it's not good for you to internalize everything either. You need to have someone to talk to about the things that are getting to you, whether it's the upcoming battle with Shigaraki and his forces, or just that you can't stand to take another English test. Not even saying that it has to be me that you come to with these complaints, but bottling up everything inside doesn't end well for people with your set of responsibilities. Aries smiled grimly and replied, I don't know that I could vent about it if I tried, sir. In the future, we were barely able to mourn our dead, much less take the time to process how it made us feel. You're not in the future, Aerie. Aizawa interrupted before she could continue explaining her habits. You're in the present, and you have this time to take advantage of so that you can heal the wounds that you may have even forgotten about. You have people who will care about you that are ready to help if you ask for it. Aerie finished packing her bag as images of Mirio, Izuku, and others in her class flickered through her mind, both from the present and future days. She knew they would jump through any hoop to help her, which was also why she didn't feel right about asking them for help. I've already taken up enough of their time and efforts by bringing my problems with me, she decided as she shouldered her backpack. I know Dad is worried about me, but I'll be alright as long as I can keep working toward Shigaraki's downfall. Even heroes need rescuing sometimes, Aizawa said as she reached the door. That doesn't stop just because you're no longer a little girl. Aerie paused and looked back over her shoulder, but her teacher was already looking down at the papers she had handed him on her way out. Hiking her backpack up on her shoulders, she exited the room, her mind laden with numerous conflicting thoughts. She came back to the dorms to find that those from Endeavor, Gang Orca, and Fat Gum's agencies were the only ones who had the night off. Everyone else was still out, working hard under the watch of their pro mentors to keep Japan safe from the still increasing criminal activities. Things had slowed down for a while following Kurai's nationwide debut, but after his death was made public, crime had started to rise again, forcing the heroes to double down on their efforts to keep the peace. Hey, Aerie, Izuku said as he waved her over toward the kitchen. We just finished making dinner, so I hope you're hungry. Kirishima, Shoji, and Jiro were all poring over their math books with their bowls on the side, apparently trying to compile their work and eating time in order to make a more efficient schedule. You idiots call this dinner? Bakugo shouted from where he was sitting alone, a half-empty bowl in front of him. Glaring at Todoroki, he then added, You're a disgrace to your sister, Icy Hot! Aerie looked a question at her predecessor, who shook his head and sighed. Long story. As he was saying this, Todoroki approached the two of them with bowls full of the curry he had made before he said, Here you go. Even if it's not the best, I hope it'll be filling. It smells great, Aerie replied with a smile. You're on your way to becoming the chef I knew in the future, Freezer Burn. The first time she had mentioned Todoroki's hero name to him, he had thought she was insulting him, leading her to explaining that he had chosen the name himself after deciding that he'd had enough of being called Icy Hot by Bakugo. The fact that the name was almost identical was never addressed by anyone, as they were glad that he had finally chosen something in the way of a hero name. After that, Todoroki had apparently changed his code name on the Hero Network, evidently having chosen to accept the name without any further protest on his part. Now he looked surprised at her latest revelation about his future self. I was a good chef? He inquired, to which she nodded quickly. We didn't always eat well, but whenever we were able to have the ingredients available, you made really good dinners for the Alliance, she told him. You never would tell me where you learned to cook, though. Probably my sister, Todoroki mused. Both her and my brother not so like making food, but she does it more often. I take it that she's really good? Aerie asked, now realizing what Bakugo had been yelling about when she came in. If Kachan had it his way, they'd fire Lunch Rush and hire Todoroki's sister. Izuku chuckled. Damn right! Bakugo shouted before he went back to tearing into his dinner with continuous grumblings. As the thought of Todoroki learning from his sister, probably with a red and white apron involved, crossed Aerie's mind, another thought interrupted her happier musings and caused the corners of her mouth to turn downward. Seeing this, Izuku asked her what was wrong, leading to her lowering her gaze and saying, I know it's not really my business, but Freezerburn, have you told Endeavor about Dabi yet? The common space fell dead quiet at her question, and Aerie cringed as she waited for the inevitable reprimand that she was no doubt in for. Instead of harsh words, however, Todoroki simply looked down at his food and answered, I haven't really been able to bring it up. I can still hardly wrap my head around it as it is. He gestured with his head for a pensive Aerie to follow him as he went on to say, Thanks to my father, I didn't really have much interaction with any of my siblings until recent years, even though we all lived in the same house, and Toya was no exception to the rule. I honestly hardly knew him, and we all thought that he perished in a forest fire when I was a little kid. I've been face to face with my brother, and I didn't even recognize him. His voice trailed off as he set his food down on the table, leading Izuku to pat his friend on the shoulder in a gesture of support. It's not your fault, Todoroki, he said as they all began to sit. It was dark that night, and based on the pictures we've seen of him as Dobby, he's clearly gone to considerable lengths to obscure his identity. He obviously didn't want anyone to recognize him, you included. I know that, Todoroki murmured as he sat heavily in his chair. I just wish I knew how to break it to Endeavor and my mom. Not to mention Fuyumi and Natsuo. If it would take the burden off your shoulders, I could explain it to them, Eri started to say, but Todoroki was already shaking his head in the negative. That would cause more problems than it would solve, he told her. We don't really want to have to explain your identity to anyone that we don't absolutely have to. And something like this should come from a family member, even if I hardly qualify with my brother and sister. Ugh, shut up with the pity party, Bakugo growled as he jammed his eating utensils into his empty bowl. Your stupid old man might be one thing, but if your sister and brother heard that crap coming out of your mouth just now, they'd kick your ass almost as fast as I can. Grow up, and tell those two and your mom what they have a right to know. The asshat is going to make it public sometime in the future anyway, isn't he? He glared the last question at Eri, who squirmed uncomfortably under his gaze. He did make some kind of video release detailing his childhood after the war began, she admitted. I was little at the time, but Freezerburn mentioned a couple of times that his goal always seemed to be aimed toward doing whatever he could to ruin their father's reputation, even long after he was dead. Todoroki continued to stare at his food with a blank expression before he mumbled, It's not as though my father doesn't deserve to have his crimes against his family exposed, but even I don't want him to be caught off guard by this in public when the war begins. Unfortunate as it is, the heroes of this country need someone to rally behind, and he's the number one hero. There's no time to prop up another figurehead who can inspire others to act against Shigaraki's army when the time comes. So he needs to know what he's getting into before he goes out there. A slightly bitter smile creased the teen's face as he softly added, For years I wanted to see my father's actions come back and bite him, and now I'm actually going to be the one who delivers the news to him. There's a cautionary tale in getting what you asked for. I'm sorry I brought this up. Todoroki held up a hand to cut off Eri once again before he said, I've been running from the problem at hand, which I guess runs in the family. Another wry expression crossed his face before he sobered up and muttered, Whatever the reason, I'll eventually need to stop avoiding this mess and tell my father the truth. Flicking his gaze back and forth between the girl and Izuku, he finished by saying, You two have a bad habit of forcing people to confront the ugly truths that they would rather avoid about themselves. Sorry, the two One For All successors mumbled as they made an apologetic gesture almost simultaneously. Bakugo snorted as he walked away while muttering, You people spend way too much time apologizing for crap. When you can't back those up with actions, don't waste time with empty words. Sometimes the words are the only actions that are needed, Todoroki said over his shoulder. No one asked you, Icy Hot! Around midnight that evening, a few of the work-study students started to trickle in, Mina Ashido among them. She was rubbing her eyes to keep them open as she approached her room, only to nearly fall over as she stopped when she saw that there was someone standing in front of it. It took her tired eyes a few seconds to recognize Eri in a set of black pajamas that matched her dyed hair. You're looking more and more like Mr. Aizawa, and it's starting to get kind of freaky, the pink girl mumbled as she shuffled toward her door, her feet fairly dragging along as she did. It had been a long evening on patrol with Hagakure and Aoyama under the stern eyes of the number 9 hero, Yoroi Musha. Sorry to bother you so late, Eri apologized as she moved away from the door. I just needed someone to talk to. Mina stopped with her hand on the doorknob before she looked at the other girl with blurry eyes and said, 5 sugars and cream. Huh? If you want to have some girl talk, I'm down, but I need some serious wake-up juice if I'm going to keep my eyes open, she said when Eri simply looked befuddled. I'm going to get changed into my PJs, so go make some coffee while I'm doing that, will ya? With a cream and 5 sugars? Eri repeated. Or was that 5 creams and 1 sugar? 5 sugars, 1 cream, 1 cup, 5 minutes. Mina mumbled as she opened her door and went inside. At this time of the evening, I don't care if it's the crappy instant coffee that Edith swears by. I just need something to keep me up. Got it, Eri said as she moved down the hall to do as she had been instructed. I'll be right back. When she made it back with the requested item in hand, she thought that she found Mina asleep sitting up against the wall on her bed. However, when she started to edge back out of the room, thinking that it might be better to try again on a day when the other girl wasn't just getting back from hero work, Mina perked up and said, Bring that coffee back if you know what's good for you, sweetie. Yes, ma'am, Eri said as she quickly re-entered the room and held out the mug for Mina to take, kicking the door shut behind her. Sorry it took so long. Relax and call me Mina. the pink girl said as she cracked her heavy eyelids open and accepted the drink. We've been over this. Right, sorry. Mina let out a small sigh before she tentatively sipped at the coffee in the cup and subsequently made a face. Seeing it, Ari Winston asked, "Is it that bad?" "Not by any fault of yours," Mina replied with a shrug before she tilted her head back and, much to Ari's surprise, quaffed the rest of the drink in one go. As the other girl set the mug down on her desk, she added, "I'm never trusting Ida when it comes to coffee again, though." Didn't that burn you?" Ari gaped, still looking a little stunned at the fact that Mina had simply downed the hot beverage without batting an eye. "Helps keep me awake better," her friend shrugged. "Now that I am, what can I do for you? Boy troubles?" "What? No, nothing like that," the raven-haired teenager said with a rapid shake of her head. "Then you, my friend, may be in the wrong room," Mina chuckled. Before Ari could take it too seriously, however, she said, "I'm kidding. What's up?" "Well," Ari hesitated for a moment, but knowing that it was already late and that Mina deserved a good night's sleep sooner rather than later, she pressed on to say, "Eraser, Mr. Aizawa told me that he thinks I'm internalizing all my problems, and that I need to have someone to talk to about them. I've been trying to ignore it since I've never really done anything like that, but the thought just won't quit. I don't really know what kind of problems everyone already knows I have is going to do for me. I've already told everyone everything, and made some of their lives harder in the process." She cringed as she thought of Todoroki's face when he had firmed his resolve to confront his father regarding Dabi. "Depending on your audience, it can make all the difference," Mina said, every joking manner gone from her bearing as she looked at the other girl with sympathy. "Whenever you've talked about the future in One for All up to now, you've always done it in a group with people looking to you for the answers. Every once in a while, you gotta take a minute and let yourself be the one to ask questions. You can't always have the answers, you know?" "I don't have the answers, though," Ari mumbled. "All I have are problems that I bring with me. I came here hoping that Kai would be the answer to those problems, but I just made things worse for him. But not for the rest of us," Mina insisted. "It's unfortunate that Kurai was taken from where he belonged, but the silver lining is that we get to have our time with him again. I know that's selfish, but I just can't look at it any other way. I wanted him back more than anything else, and you made that happen, Ari. I know I'm not the only one who's grateful for that fact." "I know," Ari sighed, thinking back on how Togata had told her much the same thing. Maybe they're right about all of this. "What else is eating you?" the other girl inquired as she grabbed her pillow and hugged it against her chest. "You wouldn't have stayed up this late just to rehash some old stuff, would you? Something else is on your mind." "Well," Ari hesitated before ducking her head and saying, "It's just, ever since Kai and Deku rescued me, I've always admired them. And while I got to know Deku well in the future, I only ever knew Kai through the stories that some of the others told about him. But they always talked about what kind of hero he was, not really the guy he was beneath the hero costume. And, well, you and Nakaru knew him better than anyone, but neither of you ever really talked about him. I just wanted to know more about my hero, I guess." "And you had to wait until the middle of the night to do that?" Mina deadpanned. "This seemed like the only time when we weren't studying or you were out on a work study," Ari mumbled, turning red as she did. "Sorry." Mina let out a sigh before she said, "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be complaining about anything in front of you of all people." Shifting in her seat so that her back was more flat against the wall, she then asked, "What about Kurai do you want to know? You said you know all about Kai, but not the man behind the myth." "You're sure?" Ari asked hopefully as she perked up a little bit. "I will guarantee you answers to 5 questions, Mina grinned tiredly. "After that, I may switch to talking in my sleep." "Thank you, Mina." It was coming up on the end of January, and Ari was feeling better about her busy work schedule when Mina approached in the common space on a Sunday with a worried frown. "What's wrong?" Ari asked instantly. "Has something happened to Kai?" "I don't know," Mina said with a negative shake of her head. "But Akurui just called, said he wants to meet in the teacher's lounge with Mr. Aizawa, All Might, and Izuku. He said that it concerns Kurai, but he wouldn't say what's happening over the phone." "Then let's get going," Ari said when she stood up from her half-finished English homework. "With any luck, it's time for him to come home."
In the shadows I've grown, in my struggles I've shown, I'll never back down for anyone. You think that this is the end, I've just begun. Through my life I've been gentle, but I know it's in my mental.
right. So how do we feel about that one?
All right. So, I mean, it's nice because it's almost like a side story because you've got what's going on with Aerie, which I kind of appreciate because I feel like in the past you've added characters to your stories and they're introduced and then they're
just there.
They're just plot devices and they'll like contribute in a battle because they have a cool power or they'll say something like one thing that changes the perspective of the protagonist. But I kind of like that you actually give her some humanity and a personality here. And, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, so we've had her in what you could call a slow period for a bit here, but like the last time we saw stuff from her perspective was like when she was telling her story about what happened in the future. Mm-hmm. So like this is the first time we're getting like into her headspace while
she's in
normal stuff is going around.
Yeah, I think because there's so many characters in the story, you're in danger of fairy tailing it. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean is like in the show Fairy Tale, you have this insanely large cast, right? And it's really cool the way it's done because throughout the show you'll randomly get little tidbits and then backstories for each individual character. But it's like you get their backstory in one arc and then you just kind of throw them to the side and then they're just there.
Yeah.
And every once in a while they'll make a comment and they'll come in, but it takes, I think, really good writing to be able to kind of continuously weave that person through a story rather than just having a one shot in one arc and then they're just a background character now, you know?
Yeah. Honestly, it was a toss-up for this one because I knew I wanted to do Akarui and I knew I wanted to do Mina's perspective of this time. It was honestly a toss-up between Aerie and Deku. And I decided to go with Aerie because she was a lot more prevalent to the current circumstances.
I see.
Like, not to say that Deku's unimportant, like we covered that already, but like other than training Energon, there wasn't a whole lot that I could do to make his own chapter. There's actually going to be a couple of scenes in the next chapter with Mina where they talk.
Mina and Deku or Mina?
Mina and Deku are going to Mina and Deku are going to talk. So I won't say more than that because I don't want to give out spoilers, but like how Deku's been dealing with all this will definitely come into play. It was a toss-up, but I felt that there was more content that I could do with Aerie, especially in getting her to relate to what's going on around her.
Yeah.
Because, like, she's been focused on getting to this spot, to this point in her plan, and, you know, her plan's been kind of screwed after she brought Krodai back to life, and now she has this moment of, now what?
Yeah, I think that's a common trope that I feel like a lot of people deal with in real life too, because you'll have this goal of getting past something, you know, like I think in our generation it's getting the degree.
You said that you had issues with that movie Soul because it gets to that point where like the guy fulfills his dream and then he's like, okay, what's next? And they're like, that's it. Right? You remember saying something about that?
I remember saying something like that. If I'm being honest, it's so long ago and I've kind of suppressed the memory of watching it because I hated the movie so much.
That's funny.
I know I'll get a lot of hate because a lot of people really loved the movie, but it made me so angry that
there was no they didn't touch on the fact that like there's things to do beyond your goals that can oftentimes end up better than what your goal was to begin with.
Exactly. And I think for me, I mean, I don't know if this will be really relatable for anyone, but for me and a lot of women that are in my demographic who I've met and talked to, we were raised in this very evangelical Christian culture. Where in our generation we had the whole like I kiss dating goodbye, but I want to get married someday and I want to have kids someday, right? And so we had that whole culture, and then it just became this whole struggle bus of getting married and courting without dating, and it was just this weird thing, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the thing we wanted most was to get married and have kids.
Yeah.
And I've talked to multiple women who experienced the same thing.
Didn't
and
stop
then,
you from having a career though.
That's different for me, but I'm getting there.
Okay.
But like, you know, a lot of us had that whole thing, but we didn't, instead of, you know, as quote unquote Christians, we weren't thinking of honoring the Lord or, you know, pursuing our faith in any way. It was just like, this is what I do because this is the culture I'm in.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of women who, once they got married and had kids, they reached this breaking point because it's like, wait a minute, what now? I just did what I did, and now I'm going through the monotony of life and the monotony of raising kids, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful, beautiful experience, but it's like, is this it? What was I doing this for? Like, I reached my goals. Now what? Now what do I strive for? And it's, and because we were failing to live in that moment and honor the Lord in that moment and just honor who we are, like, we are in Him in that moment. And so you reach this kind of crisis where your whole world has been wrapped up in this idea for so long that you all of a sudden have no ambition. And I think for me personally, it was extra weird because I don't know why. I think I got wrapped up in romanticizing martyrdom and death was when I was younger. And I know that's morbid, but I was an emo kid, right?
Well, we all grew up with the generation of the Hunger Games and all that. So that was pretty macabre.
And we also were, we're millennials. So we're the first generation who's really completely absorbed in world events. And when you see all of the bad going on in the world all the time, you just have this idea, this very, how do you say, negative idea of the world and how the world's gonna end pretty soon anyway and I'm gonna die, right?
Yeah.
And so growing up with that ideal, I just genuinely didn't think I was gonna make it past my 20s. So by the time I made it to my 20s, I was like, what the heck? I have zero ambitions. I have zero goals. What am I going to do with my life now?
Hello.
But I think it's just, you have to come to this place where you've achieved what you wanted and it's not necessarily what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to make of it what you can in the best way possible. So I'm sorry if that was a long tangent, but the way I look at it is people often, like, I think young adults definitely hit this point. And we used to call it a midlife crisis. And it's so funny because you're seeing a lot of young adults go through this whole, like, crisis of identity in our mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Because we're like, wait a minute, life goes on.
Yep.
Who am I?
Life goes beyond what they show you in the romance movies from Hollywood.
Yeah, and then, that's why a lot of, like, just to go on with the same, example, we see so many marriages ending after just a few years because it's like you get it, you achieve it, but then you're not willing to continue working for it while pursuing other things. And that's what's so wild is you have to not only, when your life becomes entangled with other people, you have to not only continue fighting for those people and fighting to, like, grow, because you have to force yourself to make the choice to love and to make the choice to be a positive person in that relationship. But it's like your life expands and there's more things that matter, whether it's career or your creative journey or whatever, what have you, whatever ministries you're involved in, if that's what you do, so it's, just we've had so many stories of this coming of age. And then
what did they do when they came of age?
Yeah.
What do they do in the years after the age?
And that's why I think Boruto gets a lot of hate, but I think a lot of people enjoy it because the generation that grew up with Naruto were like, well, I'm still a person even though I'm not a teenager,
Yeah.
And so
I
what
think
happens
Ranger's
for me
Apprentice
next?
is a really good example of this because
those books are great.
the first few books is Will being the Ranger's apprentice, and from book 5 onward, he's the Ranger.
Yeah.
And it like just because he's a teenager, that doesn't mean that his journey stops.
And then later on, you have him being able to raise the next generation of Rangers.
He has the Ranger's apprentice at that point.
And so it just comes full circle and continues to grow in a beautiful way and branch out.
So we're seeing for Eri here kind of the beginnings of that. Like okay, I did this goal. Now what? Well, time to figure that out.
She has to, figure. And then that's what I think that's what all the readers are asking too, because they're like, well, now we have two
One for
all
all
users.
What
What
do we
the
do
heck?
what do we do with
What
that?
do we do with this? Like, the odds need to be insanely stacked for this to even be compelling anymore.
Oh, they will be.
And so,
They
you know,
will be.
yeah, but anyway, I think that's what a lot of the readers are left wondering here, and they're curious about what the heck you're doing.
Yeah. It's like I didn't put her onto the point of like having a full-blown identity crisis. Like, and I don't even think that she was coming near to one. But but a lot of this was her kind of questioning, like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Have I done the right thing up to now? But like she accepts the fact, she's like, well, I can't change stuff. I can't change the stuff that I did. I need to keep. It's like I have to work with I have to do what I can with the stuff going forward. Yeah. What was I gonna say? What did you think of the Kurt scene that was in the middle of this?
I liked it.
Yeah.
Because we're able to see that sometimes going by, he's starting to get a little bit more emotionally stable and aware that, okay, this happened to me. Where am I going from here? That same theme, right?
Yep.
With Aerie.
Yep.
And he's like, okay, you know, he's still the person that he was deep down. He's just gone through a lot. And at the end of the day,
They're seeing bits of that starting to come back to the surface.
And he still wants to help people.
Yeah.
He doesn't think he's capable of helping them in the same way he did before, but he has this desire. And his counselors,
that was an important distinction to make. I felt this is like he was kind of being sassy about it last time. He was like, well, you know, trying to help everybody all the time, so letting me in here. But he's been able to sit down and think about it, and he's like, this is too much of who I am to be able to just let it go.
Yeah, and I like that too, though, because again, we live in this culture where it's like self-love. If it doesn't help you, get that toxic person out of your life. You know, avoid the toxicity. You be you. You know, and we get.
We're not advocating for toxic relationships, by the way.
No. And like, that's the thing. You have to have boundaries, but you also are not going to contribute to the world. You're not going to change the world, make it a different place if you're not grappling with stuff in your life. And so he's realizing, okay, I was being selfish, I was hurting, and I lashed out, but at the end of the day, I still want to make a difference in the world. I still want to help people. And that's a really big step for him.
And he doesn't say it in as many words. Like, he talks about, like, this is what my dad taught me to do, it's what my grandfather did before him. Like,
it's who he is.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen throughout the story, like, honoring Kurt-Eye's ancestors and the way that they raised him is very important to him.
Yeah. And it's he can't just let go of that.
No.
And I also
certainly there are things about him that have changed. Like we see that he's a lot more he's more subdued than he used to be, which is saying something in some regards. And whenever he does speak out, he's a lot more harsh about it. He used to have some tact. But at this point, he's just kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, we still see bits of that. Like, we still see bits of his core personality still. It's still in there.
Yeah, and I think I also really love how his therapist is able to go, okay, pump the brakes, buddy.
Yep.
You need to figure out where you're at before you decide you're going to go fix the world, right? And I think that's another mistake people get.
People with savior complexes,
exactly.
especially.
We get this savior complex, and we're like, especially people who've got really a bleeding heart and they really love others, but they don't realize, like, there's that line between self-love and self-care, right?
Yep.
So we have this really, I'm going to use the word toxic, but it is, idea of this self-love where you're like pampering yourself and really just being extra about it.
Yeah.
There's a difference between that and self-care.
That's called narcissism.
Exactly. And so you've got to have self-care. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to make sure you are in a good emotional headspace and you are in a good just mental capacity to reach out and pour out to others, right?
Yeah.
You're not sitting there and indulging yourself in everything. Like that's a weakness of mine, right? And I'm having to really grapple with that recently. But so we have this whole idea of indulgence versus self-care, and that's just self-care taken to an extreme. And so what the therapist is saying is like, yeah, you were being selfish, and I get that you are feeling guilty for being selfish, but you still need to make sure you're in a good place, because otherwise you're not going to be able to help anybody.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're just going to drag them down with you.
Yep.
And
Or drag himself right back in there.
and he doesn't need that. Cool. So, like, I mean, did you have anything else from that scene?
No, I remember coming up with her kind of like, he's gonna need somebody he can relate to, because otherwise he's not gonna care.
Yeah, when she enters, you can just tell when she enters, like, it's different.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it too, because anybody who's gone through therapists knows, like, it's hard to open up to certain personalities. You have to find someone who's a good fit, because otherwise it's just uncomfortable and you don't get good work done.
No.
And I think both of us have experienced that, where we've had bad therapists, and they're not necessarily bad for everyone, but they just didn't work
They
for
didn't
us.
work for our personalities
Yeah,
or background.
but then when you get the right person, they
can make all the difference.
Oh,
for
absolutely.
Sure. For sure.
Even if they're saying the same exact thing, it's just the way they carry themselves makes us feel more comfortable, and we're more likely to listen to them.
Moral of this chapter: if you need it, get a good therapist, people.
And don't quit if you get a bad one the first time.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of enjoyed not necessarily Ari getting to the bottom of what's troubling her, but her kind of coming to something of a realization where she's just like, I don't really. She's like, I know about these people and like all the things that they've done, which is good, and like she even got to know someone on a personal level, but she kind of realizes that like she's had this idea of Kurt Eye in her head all this time, and she's starting to realize like, I don't really know him.
Yeah.
Like she's idolized him. She admires what he's done. That's not to say that she shouldn't admire the things that he did, but she's kind of coming to understand. It's like she hasn't really. Like, she understands that he's upset at his circumstances, but I don't think she could really put her finger on why. Like, she couldn't really understand, like, the why of how he was so upset. And so now she's trying to come to be like, I need to understand. She wants to understand him better so that she doesn't do this kind of thing again.
Yeah, and so she's going through like classes and training. She's got the cool gauntlets from Makarui, which so she's kind of.
I loved her interaction with Lemillion.
Yes,
because I was like, I was thinking about his character, and I'm like, nah, he wouldn't treat her any different.
No,
like
absolutely not.
I'm like 100% he would treat her the same way.
He would just be familiar with
Yes,
her right off
yes.
the bat because he knows that's what she needs, and that's
It's
who
not
he
even. I don't
is.
think it's even like he knows that she needs that, but I don't think that's honestly like a contributing factor in his attitude toward her. That's just who he is.
It is who he is, but you know, if you really think about it, a lot of people are like, "Hi, nice to meet you. I mean, you know who I am," and it's awkward. But he's just gonna be like, "No, she knows me.
Yep.
We're good.
Yep.
And that's my friend.
Yep.
Just a few years later, you
Yep.
know, and that's my little friend, just
Yep.
all grown up. It's
Yep.
fine,
Yep.
and it's great."
I'm glad that I had like going into this chapter. I honestly hadn't thought about that, but then like I realized I was like, wait, I can't have an Aerie chapter without a Lemillion interaction.
Absolutely.
And then like I just started planning the conversation, and I realized I'm like, no wait, this is really good for her because she has at least that one person who's like, no, it's Aerie, just a little older.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's cool.
exactly.
It's like, this is awesome.
But then, you know, so she's trying to fit into this weird, not post-apocalyptic life.
Which,
as a
if it wasn't
student.
weird enough, she's going to school with people she has idolized her entire life.
It's bizarre. And so, you know, she's starting to get a little comfortable, and then she
Like,
has
this
some
would just-
massive foot and mouth
Like,
syndrome.
to me, this would be like all of a sudden I'm going to have lunch with like Christopher Paolini and John Flanagan and C.S. Lewis and Tolkien.
Yes.
Like that would, and then like that would be them talking, like that would be me going to lunch with them when they're all like young men,
like your age.
and like
yeah.
we're all figuring ourselves out.
Yeah, it would be bizarre.
That would be the weirdest thing, because like I would be able to see like I think I would be able to see elements of who these people would become eventually, like
Yeah.
these legendary writers whose names are going to live on.
But
for
then you're
hundreds of
also
years.
seeing them as awkward young people.
Yeah. So like I was trying to draw on like what would that be like for me?
Because I mean, for me, like the closest thing I have to this is I always go back to C.S. Lewis. I'm sorry, but like when I crack open some of his early short stories, they're freaking weird.
Yeah.
Okay, they're like he wasn't quite at his best.
Yeah.
And that's a reason they're not commonly published. But because he's so famous, everything he's ever written has been published. And so that's why I have this little collection of short stories. But some of them are freaking weird and not very well done. And I'm like, bro, okay. Even he
had a starting point.
Yeah, and it's just like an artist's sketchbook where you have lots of sketches that are not necessarily well polished, well thought out, and that's why they weren't, proudly produced into the public by the artist, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's great. But yeah, she's having this kind of culture shock, and then of course she's starting to get comfortable, so she has massive foot and mouth when it comes to Todoroki.
Yeah.
And
that was a. I was like, again, I can't have everything going swimmingly for these characters. They have to make mistakes.
But at the same time, someone kind of needs to give him a little nudge.
Yep.
Because if
Todoroki doesn't like confronting his problems.
No, he doesn't. And that's the thing, though.
It's like, it's like my father's an asshole. Gonna avoid him. That kid from that kid Yorashi from Ketsubutsu is heckling me because of my dad. I'm gonna ignore him. So on and so forth.
Yeah, but and I mean that's the thing. Eri realizes she has made a massive mess coming back, so she's like, well, we gotta at least try to fix the things.
We gotta deal with the fallout.
Yeah, so she's like, I mean, at the very least, we can maybe like repair your father's public image before it's damaged.
Or like, not even that, but like get him ready for, like, not even soften the impact, just like let him be ready for what's coming.
Well, no, it will though, because if the good guys have the information and know what's going to happen ahead of time, they have the time and energy to make that spin.
Yeah.
So it would be a lot easier to feed an alternate but similar story.
She's not even talking about like addressing the public about Dabi. She's talking about getting Endeavor ready for this.
But Endeavor being Endeavor and being in the shoes he's in, he's not dumb.
Yeah.
So if he has this information under his belt, if he has any common sense, he still has to plan for this, right? Yeah. And I have a hard time believing that he would just stand by and let it go happen the way that it did originally.
Yeah.
Because it's like, at the end of the day, he's been fighting for this #1 hero title his whole life.
Yep.
And he's getting to be a better dad, but he's no dummy. And he knows that if you can make the media spin it your way, you're golden.
Yep, this is true.
It's gonna be kind of
hard for him to spin this one, though.
A headline saying #1 hero heartbroken to find out long lost son is villain. That's very different from villain comes out with tragic childhood story of abuse, right? Those are two very different headlines, right?
This is very true.
And so if the media spins it a certain way, it's going to be a lot harder for the public to feel sorry for Dabi when he comes out with his sob story, as true as it is.
Yeah.
This is true. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you got it.
But that's the catch-22 with Shoto, is that he's like, he wants his dad to answer, to be held accountable for everything that he's done.
Oh, he does.
So he's like, oh, this is a lesson in getting what you wish for. So, yeah.
But so we'll see.
That's gonna be an interesting conversation to be had.
Yeah. So we have yet to see what happens there.
Yeah.
But moving on, then we have poor Mina being woken up by a.
Not even woken up. She's just like.
She's not even able to sleep yet.
She's just like, why? I love putting in that little bit where she's just like, you're starting to look more like Aizawa, and it's freaking me out.
I love that so much.
I was just like, Eri dressed in black pajamas. How would oh my goodness, it's like a gender bent Aizawa with a horn. Oh no.
A sleep deprived
Because she's even got the red eyes going.
Mm-hmm. She's sleep deprived. She's in black pajamas. Oh yeah, 100%. Just mini Aizawa.
Yep.
Just add the black hair dye and you've got gender bent Aizawa.
Yep.
With a horn.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. I was like, that wasn't like, that's something I actually like kind of added last minute, because I was just like, wait a minute, I can have fun with this.
Nice.
But yeah, so the next chapter is going to be from Mina's point of view, but we're also going to, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to get a fair amount of Deku thrown into it as well, because it's not going to be from his point of view, but he is an important character in the story. His dynamics certainly shouldn't be discounted, especially given that he's got Kurdai's powers now. So yeah, I hope you guys are looking forward to that. And I will say that the end of the next chapter is where things are going to start where things are going to pick up again.
Nice.
Yeah. We're not, so like, this next chapter is going to be what's been happening in January and then some.
Okay.
So yeah, so we're gonna move back into exciting territory.
Yay.
I'll call it. So yeah, those of you that are like, okay, man, enough fluff. Next chapter, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. So
Oh man.
I hope you guys stick around that long.
You're like that that insurance ad where the little old man has the dollar on the fish hook. Almost had it. Almost got it. Almost got it. I hate
that was a
that
State.
so much.
That was a
that
State Farm. Yeah, that was a State Farm.
Oh my
commercial.
gosh.
That always made me laugh.
You're evil. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging in there and enjoying. I'm enjoying it. I hope you guys are too.
Yeah. I'm enjoying writing it.
All right.
So,
We'll see ya.
We'll catch you guys on the next one. Stay plus ultra till then.